and do abuse women, right? And so those were some of the things that I found particularly striking, and also the fact that children very often witness their mothers being abused. And we found in the survey, there was a lot of literature that talks about this intergenerational transmission of violence in families. And we found very strong evidence to support that happens in Jamaica. We found that men who had seen their father abuse their mothers were more likely to abuse their partners. Women who had seen their mothers being abused by her partner were more likely to experience abuse. So what we have from this data is this sort of complex picture, because there is no, there is no one thing. We have to recognize that this matter of intimate partner abuse is influenced by so many factors. And it is so complex and so intertwined in the fabric of Jamaican life that we really have to look at very seriously at ways to address the root causes if we want eventually to rid our society of intimate partner violence.
Thank you, Carol. You mentioned girls who leave homes to live with men, that they're more vulnerable to violence. In your research or during the research process, did you uncover the varying reasons why girls might leave their home to go and live with men, or leave where they previously reside to go live with older men? Did it look at the circumstances or environment that allowed for this this to happen?
The survey itself didn't, well, the survey report, and I want to make a distinction here between the survey data and the survey report. So I keep saying that we have data that can explore a lot more issues around the issue of intimate partner violence. The survey report, to be honest, was a scratch on the surface. There is data in the data set that I really hope other people will take and look at it from different dimensions. And this whole matter of the woman's looking at her socioeconomic background, or her socioeconomic and social psychological background, because it's not just socioeconomic reasons why people do these things, although we like to think of it that way. But so the report itself didn't really touch on that, but there was another piece of work that accompanied the report, which was the qualitative research, which for many reasons, and I see Taitu on the call, and she was also involved in the whole process. And you know, we knew for many reasons that wasn't made public. But in that qualitative piece of research, one of the things that was really striking was how...
Can't really say, look how long we sit down and say something now work.
Hello?
We're gonna ask everyone to keep their mics muted while the panelists are speaking, just so that we don't miss anything that's being said. Thanks.
Right. So in the qualitative research, one of the things that the researcher found, and that was done by Joy Moncrief, what she found was that we still had these deeply entrenched, and I'm going to use the word, a lot of people don't like it, but we still had these deeply entrenched patriarchal values that sometimes propel parents to direct their daughters in particular directions and to endorse some types of behavior that put the girl child at risk. And one type of behavior that certainly came out was this idea of being able to fend for herself, and also being able to, through her relationship with an older man, help to support the family. Those things we know for sure put young girls at greater risk of violence.
Yeah, sexual grooming is a really deeply entrenched part of our culture, as you mentioned, and it would be great, I think, for researchers to do a little little bit more exploration on sexual grooming, because I do believe that there are a lot of people who don't believe that sexual grooming is what we say it is, or that it is as apparent in our society. But also we tend to blame young women for being in these sort of arrangements. We blame the teenagers for being in these sort of relationships, without problematizing the relationship, without looking at the conditions surrounding such a relationship.
Yeah.
One of the things that I noted in the report, and I'll read a quote here. It says, the data suggests that women may only seek help from the police when they're severely injured. Almost half of those who went to the police were satisfied with the help they received. The data revealed that women do not choose to seek help for intimate partner abuse from religious organizations, social service institutions, or women's groups. They instead choose to seek help from their personal networks. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, whether there were any insights into why women choose not to go to these sorts of organizations, but also how do you think we can leverage this sort of opportunity to create a framework for community response, especially for the women who would rather go through their personal networks or to go to somebody who is very close to them? How do you think that we can use that or see that as an opportunity for us to create a sort of community response where we can have support for these women and perhaps even create some sort of a framework for accountability?
Yeah, I have thought a lot about this help seeking data, because we found that most women who suffer intimate partner violence do not in fact seek help. And when they go to the police, it's because it has either been so prolonged or so severe that they want it to stop. And so the police and the hospitals or health centers are the two main institutional areas from which women seek help. And what I think is going on here is this idea, we have to look at how we frame intimate partner violence in our overall landscape. Because I think there's a way in which, because women, and in the survey, women said they didn't seek help because they didn't really think the beatings were that bad. So they didn't see any reason to seek help for the abuse. And so there's this generalized understanding that while women do not believe that that beating should be tolerated, they have set up a schema based on what they think is severe enough for an intervention. So there are some types of abuse that it seems that women are prepared to absorb at one level, but even though we think of them as absorbing it, they're still telling their friends and family that this has happened. So they're not silent. We found that more than 80% of women who had been abused had told someone that they had been abused. So it's not this wall of silence that we had been led to believe that surrounds intimate partner violence. It's just a matter of who they choose to tell and why they choose to make the report. So the police comes in when it is felt that this is really getting out of hand and the woman is really, really at risk. In fact, today I read a report about this incident in last night, I think it was, or maybe it was Wednesday night, where a man was killed when he tried to defend the woman he was in a relationship with, because she had been stalked. It was yesterday. So she had been stalked and abused by her former partner. And in the report, they said they've been reporting it to the police for 4 days now, and they hadn't turned up to deal with it. So we have a system where people make decisions about whether this is something that is important enough or severe enough to be dealt with. So the police make those decisions, women make those decisions, the women's families make those decisions. And so there isn't a zero tolerance approach to intimate partner violence, the way we have a zero tolerance approach to some other things. So if there is a zero tolerance approach, perhaps then communities would, it's a complex psychology that we're dealing with, it's a very complex thing, because people determine what they think should happen next when a woman makes a report and that sort of thing. And I'm glad that the discussion today is about the victim-centered aspect of gender-based violence, because in a way, it's good to talk about community response, but the community response cannot happen separate from the best interest of the victim. And the best interest of the victim is not just what we determine it to be, it also has to be what the victim also says and considers to be her best interest. So it's not a simple story.
Oh, absolutely agree. And I'm glad that you brought it up, because again, for today, one of the things we want to try to reimagine or even try to construct is how do we go about finding avenues and ways for victims to get support, one that is based on their needs of support, because oftentimes we assume, because we've done, even people who have done the work and done the research, we assume that because we've done the research, we know exactly how to respond to the victim or how to provide support for the victim. But if it's not with the victim in mind, if it's not with the supporter, the survivor, thinking through what works for them, then our strategies will fall flat. Thank you, Carol. I want to move now to Paige. For those of you who don't know, Paige, our co-director, she just completed her master's at Ohio University, and her final research looked at intimate partner violence in Jamaica's queer community. Now, oftentimes when we discuss gender-based violence, we perhaps unintentionally look at it through a cisgendered heterosexual lens, and that neglects the intersection of queer identities and how heterosexist violence is reproduced in these queer relationships. So I'm going to allow Paige to share some of the findings from her research on how gender-based violence shows up in the LGBT community, with a very specific focus on the LBTQ community, so the lesbian, bisexual, trans, and queer communities. So take it away, Paige.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to confirm that everyone can see my screen. Kristina, you can see it?
Yes, I'm seeing it.
Yeah, it's
Perfect. Let me make sure it's working how I want it to as well. Hold on. All right. Okay, so as Kristina was saying, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer people, as well as gender non-conforming people, tend to experience higher rates of family and domestic violence than others. And there's quite a bit of research to support this, but most of it was done outside of a Caribbean context. My research that I did in pursuit of finishing my master's was qualitative, but I think one of the main recommendations coming out of the research is that there needs to be more quantitative research. I think I heard of some being done by CVCC, but it was focused mainly on gay men or men who have sex with men. So my research focuses on the experiences of lesbian, bisexual, trans, and queer people within Jamaica specifically. So to start, I think in order to speak to survivor-based approaches to GBV, we have to be clear about who these survivors are, and we also have to understand how identities can affect the way people experience different types of GBV, for example, intimate partner violence. And just for a quick definition, IPV, as I define within my research, is any type of physical or sexual violence, controlling behavior, or emotional and psychological abuse which takes place between a couple. So LGBTQ people not only experience IPV, in different ways to heterosexual people, but the systems put in place to bring restorative justice and relief are often not necessarily safe spaces for LGBTQ people. So I'm going to briefly share my research findings, and then also I want to contextualize them within the current context of COVID-19. I also hope that, while I'm presenting, keep that in mind within the rest of the conversation on centering survivors in our approach to GBV. So come work with me. I'm getting there. Just give me 2 seconds for this presentation to start over. Okay. So as Kristina mentioned, LGBTQ IPV is traditionally understood as a heterosexual issue, but research shows that the incidence of IPV within these types of relationships are sometimes higher, or in some instances at least comparable to the incidence in relationships between heterosexual couples. And while IPV is an issue which affects people regardless of their age, their sexual orientation, or their gender identity, many people just see it exclusive to a relationship between a man and a woman. And this has resulted in little understanding about the ways IPV can play out within LGBTQ relationships. This is important because if we don't see an LGBTQ relationship as a space where IPV can happen, it's going to have implications for members of the community actually identifying violence within their relationship, and that is also going to affect their willingness to maybe report that to family and friends who may not take it seriously. Because in many cases, like if me as a lesbian woman tell my friend that my partner hit me, she may not necessarily take it seriously because it's two women, and like how could violence ever be important within that type of relationship? It also affects effective intervention for survivors and perpetrators. And because IPV is a global public health issue, if we're not intentional about understanding IPV within this vulnerable and marginalized community, then the issue will just continue to worsen. So as I switch over to my research questions which guided my work, I was very intentional in focusing on lesbian, bisexual, trans, and queer women within the research, because generally speaking, members of these groups are often silenced within the wider LGBTQ movement, and then also instances of IPV within these types of relationships are often invisibilized. Just for information regarding the methodology I used, as IPV isn't something easy to speak to, and also because I really wanted to adequately understand the experiences of the LGBTQ women I work with, I opted to do interviews, allowing the people I work with to help me uncover information rather than extracting information from them. Regarding my findings, I'll go through them, and as I mentioned before, I want to contextualize them within the current climates of COVID-19. So overall, the main factors that the research brought to light, which seem to cause incidences of intimate partner violence within LGBTQ relationships, are one, high levels of discrimination and stigma generally meted out toward LGBTQ people in Jamaica. The second is the adoption of heteronormativity by LGBTQ people. And the third—
Sorry, Paige. Someone in the chat is asking if you can slow down a little. You're talking a little fast.
Okay, I'll try. I'm sorry. Right, so just to repeat that, the slide in front of us. The three main factors that the research brought to light, which seem to cause incidences of intimate partner violence within LGBTQ relationships, are one, the high levels of discrimination and stigma which tend to be meted out toward LGBTQ people in Jamaica. The second is the adoption of heteronormativity by LGBTQ people. And the third is the types of experiences that LGBTQ people tend to have with local mental health facilities and services. So in terms of in terms of high levels of discrimination and stigma, three issues I want to speak to here are dependence, codependence, and protection. So just for clarity and to make sure that we're all on the same page, when we speak to high levels of stigma and discrimination, I'm referring specifically to unfair treatment or violence meted out toward the LGBTQ community in private and public spaces. So in many cases, high levels of discrimination tend to impact the levels of education, the access to jobs, and the access to just general life opportunities that LGBTQ people tend to have. And that in turn increases the likelihood of a person being dependent on their partner to finance their basic needs, for example, housing or just food. This in turn creates a space for abuse due to unequal power dynamics as a result of that dependence. And it also lessens the likelihood that survivors will seek help out of the situation, because if you're reliant on your abuser, then your first instinct isn't to go report them. Putting this within the current reality of unemployment and financial uncertainty due to COVID-19, we can anticipate that there are even more LGBTQ people who are reliant on partners, and it follows that that also can create more space for IPV perpetration within the current reality. In terms of codependence, it follows that due to a lack of opportunities just generally as a result of systemic discrimination, in many cases, LGBTQ couples tend to be reliant on each other But what I want to focus on is the idea that in some cases, survivors find themselves in a situation where they are the breadwinner within the relationship and the provider, but they're still reluctant to leave abusive relationships because they know that doing so can put their abusive partner in a space where they won't have basic necessities. And I want to point out here that while generally I think most of us know that dependence tends to be a factor that plays out when we speak about intimate partner violence in heterosexual relationships, it often doesn't play out like this in those types of relationships. And I think it's not necessarily hard to imagine how this is impacted by the current COVID-19 pandemic and the realities. Another factor that is alive and well due to high levels of discrimination and stigma is that of minority stress. And minority stress is just unique stresses that LGBTQ people might face just as a result of being members of a stigmatized societal group. A lot of research shows a clear link between experiencing high levels of stress in public spaces and then perpetrating violence toward one's partner in private spaces. And it isn't difficult to think about how this is playing out currently, where you have many people who are stressed for many different reasons, stressed emotionally, mentally, financially. And we can think about what that high level of stress, the impact that that would have on IPV perpetration currently. The next factor that came out of my research is tied to this one, minority stress, and that's internalized homophobia. And that examines the impact that growing up in a highly discriminatory space can have on how LGBTQ people see themselves. And both this instance of research and others speak to how this can lead to IPV within relationships, especially in instances where one partner may be closeted and the other one may not. I hope I'm not going too quickly, and I want to believe that you all are understanding me, and I'm going a little slower. The other factor, the second factor, which came up a lot within my research, and which I think is particularly important to understand and intentionally deal with if we're interested in curbing this form of GBV within any type of relationship, is heteronormativity and gender roles. And in this case, within my research, gender role performance. So we know this is cultural, and it of course calls for behavior change, but it is vital to eradication. Within the research, it was very evident how our commitment to heteronormativity, and just to make sure we're on the same page, the definition that I used of heteronormativity was the assumption that heterosexuality is the default preferred state for human beings, and that people fall into one or another category of a strict gender binary, and that someone's biological sex, sexuality, gender identity, and gender roles are aligned. So our commitment to holding on to heteronormativity tends to create a space for IPV perpetration, because the very same unequal power dynamics which tend to be present in traditional heterosexual relationships make their way into LGBTQ relationships. And we see that with some LGBTQ people embodying toxic masculinity. And we also see it in the way that some LGBTQ people welcome IPV within their relationships as a means of validating their relationships. Interviews with participants showed that while lesbian, bisexual, and queer women tend to deviate from heteronormativity due to their sexual orientation, many still ascribe to traditional gender roles within their relationships. Something else that came out of the research, which was quite interesting, was in many of my conversations with trans women, while many of them deviate from the norm due to their gender identity and expression, many perform femininity within their relationships, and the performance of toxic masculinity and femininity by people within same-sex or same-gender relationships, it just often tends to create a space for IPV, and it also acts as a barrier to reporting or seeking help. Because if you think that this is something that is normal within a relationship, then you're not very likely to reach out to a friend or family member or any aspect of the justice system. All right, the third factor this is the third and final factor, was the relationship between intimate partner violence and mental health access. And for the purposes of this conversation and the current context, I'd want us to think about the difficulties that LGBTQ people can have accessing any type of healthcare or any type of social support generally, and the impact that that can have directly on IPV perpetration. But to focus specifically on mental health here, there are clear connections between mental illness and IPV perpetration. But for various reasons, LGBTQ people are more likely to experience mental illness, but less likely to actually use mental health services. And that creates space for continued IPV perpetration because perpetrators don't seek help. And there's also a lack of help for survivors who can't afford to seek help or who may not feel comfortable seeking help from mental health professionals. Regarding the wider issue of LGBTQ people not having adequate access to social support, I wanted to share some information from Marjorie on the ways that the current pandemic exacerbates the situation for LGBTQ survivors of GBV, especially those who are currently still living with abusive partners.
Paige, you can just share what Marjorie is.
You know, give me 2 seconds. I wonder if I can share my screen with this. Hold on.
Perhaps.
Okay, I can't share this information on my screen, but it's Marjorie is a global NGO focused on women's rights. And this specific instance of research I'm speaking about is a domestic violence toolkit that they put together for NGOs who are currently working with people who may be experiencing intimate partner violence or any type of gender-based violence within the current COVID-19 pandemic. Now I don't know where I was, right. So I was speaking to some of the ways that the pandemic can exacerbate the situation for LGBTQ survivors. This is a reality because government policies around the world now tend to go toward shelter at home mandates or isolation, and that can put LGBTQ people at further risk of violence. In many cases, they may be forced to isolate in hostile family homes where the family members, for whatever reason, may be homophobic and may not be giving them access to whatever they need. This was actually evidenced in a survey done by the Equality Group in Jamaica. And I also mentioned before that generally speaking, LGBTQ people tend to have limited access to shelters and healthcare and other types of social support services. And where they do have access, many times discrimination plays a role in them not actually having their access. So to put that in context locally, where we know there aren't adequate shelters, and there aren't adequate shelters, and there also aren't safe social support services that they can access. And of course, there's a lot of fear around persecution if someone was to report IPV, which further hinders their access to justice or support services. So to close, I want to reiterate the need, firstly, for us to include the LGBTQ population in conversations about survivor-based approaches to GBV, as we have to be clear about who the survivors are and understand how their identities may impact the way that they experience GBV and IPV. And I also wanted to make a couple of recommendations. Within this specific conversation, I definitely see the need for more mixed methods research. So the research that we were speaking about earlier, done by Carol, which I really relied on during my research, by the way. I think that if we're looking towards doing more research in the future on that line, it does need to include LGBTQ people actually. So I see the need for mixed methods research to assist with evidence-based advocacy. And I also think we really need, especially within this conversation about speaking about survivors and a survivor-centric frame, we need to look at healing and support for survivors through low-cost mental health services or non-traditional healing, and also commit to safe spaces such as shelters, which won't be exclusionary. I think it's also important for us to commit to not excluding perpetrators from our healing, because excluding them it puts them in a place where they'll just continue perpetrating. And the third one is, of course, strengthening support services and resources which can assist with IPV prevention and intervention. And I think that's me.
Thank you so much, Paige. I think that was an extremely informative and detailed presentation. And just a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, you can write the questions in the chat, because we will be opening up a segment for question and answers. So you can write your questions in the chat, and when it comes time to do that, we'll either read out your questions or you can use the raise hand feature and we'll allow you to ask your question. Uh, Paige mentioned in her presentation that the equality group, which includes We Change, during the height of the lockdown of COVID-19, we had sent out a survey to community members. It's an online survey, so it didn't capture a full extent of the community, but we managed to get, I believe, 213 respondents to the survey. And one of the things that came out of that survey, which you'd know if you're in LGBTQ advocacy, is that the community relies heavily on external support, meaning they rely heavily on the family that they create and curate for themselves. And so during this pandemic, where so many people have been cut off from those social circles, we can begin to consider how situations like that can increase the increase mental health issues, which Paige has mentioned, which is also a factor in IPV's increase. So I want us to begin to think around things like that and think about how in our responses to gender-based violence, as Paige said, we're not looking at who are the victims of it. And for LBQ people, reporting on intimate partner violence, especially through the authorities that we have established, is not an easy thing. It's not a thing, right? Because we know that discrimination is inherent in those systems. So I want to move on to Shawna now, who Shawna, through We Change and through working with the Tambourine Army, would have engaged and interacted with a lot of survivors of abuse, and she would have knowledge on what that reporting process is like for a lot of survivors. So I want Shawna to talk about the reporting process for survivors, and then I also want her to go into talking about, I guess, sharing what kind of support survivors need based on your interactions with them. And also a little later, we're going to go into how the current system can work to be a bit more dignified for survivors. Take it away, Shawna.
Hi, Kristina. Thank you for that. You said more dignified for survivors just now. And while you said it, my mind started racing because I know that currently the process to make reports in Jamaica is a very tedious one. So for one, the survivors will have to go through a lot of channels where they'll be sharing their stories over and over and over again. And for that is re-traumatizing. Every single time you have to be sharing your stories and have people question you. Because that is what happens. You're sharing your story and they're questioning everything that you're sharing because they want to ensure. So their thing is they want to ensure that what you're saying is actually true, right? And that you know for certain that something happened. No, I know women would not want to have to go through reporting like that if it's not something that happened. Okay, so for the survivors who would have come through the healing circle that we had with the Tambourine Army and the support group that we had for We Change, those persons, they shared that there were persons who were in the support group who were actually living in abusive relationships, whether it be emotionally or physically abusive relationships. There were persons who had experienced childhood trauma, and it was now showing in their relationships. It was now impacting the kinds of relationships that they get into and how they actually are in those relationships. And we know that, well, what I saw was women reporting persons who were in the support group. Some of them hadn't gone through the reporting process as yet. And that was because they were terrified. For one, there were persons who shared that they felt ashamed because of it. And that is something generally across Jamaica. Women don't report cases because they feel ashamed. And that's what we've done with our culture. We're now blaming women, and we're also making them feel ashamed for what happened. And they didn't do anything wrong. It's the person who did something to them. They're the ones who should be ashamed, not these women. So a lot of the persons who were in the support group, they hadn't gone through the reporting process, and they wanted support to do that. So we noted that persons wanted us, they kept asking, they wanted us to help them, to guide them through the reporting what are some of the things that we can do? Who do we go to? And what we were trying to create in Tambourine Army was a database of compassionate officers who they could go to. And we tried to connect or try to get information for officers, not just in Kingston, but across the country, who they could go to. If you're going to a police station to make a report, you want to know that they can reach out to a specific person, a person who is compassionate and would not ask the kinds of questions that made the person feel ashamed for even making the reports. So there were instances of that. Persons wanted you to guide them through therapists and counselors and even legal support, persons who could tell them, okay, when you go through this process, this is what will happen, you know, just to guide them through the whole process, not just reporting, but going through the whole court process and how long it could take. They also wanted to hear about that as well. They also wanted support to cope, and that is to cope with the trauma of the assault. And persons were asking, so there were persons who were saying that they felt ashamed. I mentioned that before, but they also had low self-esteem because of what was happening or what happened to them. And it was now showing up, not just now, but it has been showing up in their life. They're being afraid of making bold steps. They're afraid of even hanging out with friends, even forming friendships with people was difficult for them. And that is because that's the trauma that they're holding in their body. And when you hold trauma in your body, then it will impact every aspect of who you are, right? So it was affecting their health, it was affecting their overall health, it was affecting their mental health, and it was definitely affecting their work and how they performed at work. It was affecting how they kept jobs and were able to stay in employment. It was also affecting how they are and even them going into relationships. There were some who felt that I don't deserve to be the best person there is. I don't deserve the best things in life because I've gone through this. I'm dirty, I'm nasty, I'm nothing. Nobody cares about me. So they found themselves going into abusive relationships over and over and over again. And I know that can be a serious burden on anybody because I know of the court process. I know what it's like. Even if you have support going through the court process, you're at the courthouse and you're seeing your abuser because the person is sitting in the courthouse and you're facing the person while you are sharing your story and you're having the lawyers there asking you questions that would make it seem as if you were lying when you did it. So it's a quite traumatic process for survivors. And if we try to get to a more survivor-centered approach and try to create this for women and for children, just to ensure that, as a matter of fact, it cannot just be something that one person or one entity does. This has to be a countrywide approach. This is what we have to do as a country.
Thanks, Shawna. Earlier this week, We Change was a part of a conversation with someone else where we were also discussing the process for reporting and relaying that story about how long that process can be for a lot of women, a lot of persons when they're going through the quote unquote proper channels. It's this continuous experience of re-traumatizing, of reliving your trauma, and then our justice system does not have we don't have any sort of systems in place for support for victims going through this sort of process. So after I've gone through this X number of years of trial and trying to seek some amount of redress, what happens to me after that? How do I even pick up after that? It's a matter of a personal problem, really. It becomes now you have to now find the resources to find some sort of support for your emotional trauma. So we don't have that built into our system, which again speaks to the lack of survivor-centric systems within Jamaica.
Christina, as you mentioned support, there is the victim support unit. that is so when persons go to make a report, they are referred to the victim support unit for I believe it's 5 or 6 sessions, and there is probably 1 or 2 persons in the office who are therapists, and you have a 30-minute session with them. And again, what it focused a lot on is using.
Oh no, I think Shawna
Lord
froze.
says, and this is,
Shawna, you froze a little.
I'm sorry, am I back? Am I back?
Yeah, you are. Yes, you are.
I was talking about the kinds of counseling support that you're given. It doesn't focus. You see the way persons can engage in therapy that focuses on the individual. It isn't like that. It doesn't focus on the individual. It just tells you that, okay, based on what the Bible says, there is that in it. So it's Christian centered, right? And it's not so much providing survivors with tools for them to be able to cope on their own, or for them to be able to go through and be at ease on their own. But I know that it's there as a service, and the counselor that is assigned to the individual can provide support, I think, can physically be present at the courthouse with individuals who are reporting.
Carol, you had your hand up. I know you'll have to leave in a few. I hope you can
No,
manage at
man,
least one
I
question.
will stay here. I will stay. I have something else too, but I will stay. What I wanted to say, I wanted to say several things, but the first thing is that when we talk about a victim-centered approach, we have to decide what it is that we want to offer this victim or the person who is the survivor of violence, because there's a difference between giving information, giving advice, and offering tangible, I call it tangible assistance. So a lot of what happens now is, well, if you look at how persons report, so if they're reporting to friends and family, they're probably getting advice that is based on the value system of the friends and family. And as Shawna said, sometimes it's based on religion, it's based on what they think is right for the victim. And sometimes they don't get enough information about where to go to seek to seek help that can actually be restorative, right? And then, of course, there's also the issue of offering tangible assistance. Sometimes women need tangible assistance to bring them out of this situation. So they have a sense of what they want to accomplish, how they want to transition from this relationship, but they don't have the tangible assistance to make this transition. So when we talk about looking at the victim, we have to think about all those different things. And I want to say something else too about the legislative environment. So we have had a lot of conversation about whether women should have the final say as, you know, if a prosecution is advanced against a perpetrator. And we have to, I think it's important to keep having those conversations and to really sort of flesh out all the issues, because sometimes, you know, you often hear people say, well, you know, the prosecutor can prosecute somebody if they kill on their own without the approval of if there's some other crime. So why is it that we need the woman's approval in order to advance a prosecution against our perpetrator? But we have to always remember that ultimately it is the women who have to live with the consequences of the abuse and the consequences of the subsequent action, the response to the abuse. And so we must always keep the woman's view as paramount. And I keep using this word, but it is the God truth. It is complex. And so we have to be able to create some sort of space where we can bring all the views in. But the other thing about the legislative environment is, I think one of the things we need to do as a movement, if you want to think about it like that, is to begin to push for a comprehensive Violence Against Women and Girls Act. We have all the offenses. Some people will say, well, why do you need an act? This is an assault, this is an offense, and there are different the Sexual Offences Act and so on. There are different bits of legislation, the Domestic Violence Act, that deal with all these things. But you see, legislation is not just about creating an offense. Through legislation, you can also create a remedy. You can also create a comprehensive response to the violence that women suffer. So you can legislate a referral pathway, you can legislate different things. I heard Shawna talk about the absolute abhorrent fact that women have to sit in a courtroom right beside her abuser. But not only women, young girls have to do it too. And that is a problem. And so in that bit of legislation, we have to look at how we treat comprehensively with this matter of violence against women and girls. To the, you know, and I think it's an important debate to start.
Thanks, Carol. And I'm glad that you mentioned legislation, because I know that within the report, it mentioned how the international community has been sort of pushing the Jamaican government to increase their efforts to combat gender-based violence, because we understand gender-based violence to be a violation of women and girls' fundamental rights. The study also mentioned where the government has created the National Strategic Action Plan against gender-based violence. So I wanted to find out from you, as someone who's worked in this field, have you seen where this plan has been effective in its mandate? And we can push this, we can contextualize this in terms of COVID as well, and the response to gender-based violence during this pandemic.
That's me, Carol.
Yes.
Okay, no, I'm just checking because, okay, so I want to talk just a bit about the concern I have about the response during COVID, because what I have noticed is that we don't have the data. So I can see data coming out of many other countries about increases or decreases, because it was very curious to me that for example, in New York, you had a sudden plunge of reports about gender-based violence. I think we really have to look at why is it that we're not seeing an uptick in Jamaica. And my concern, I think Paige may have touched on it when she looked at the whole matter of dependency and interdependency in the LGBTQ community. And I think, broadly speaking, that is something that we should be concerned about. A lot of the jobs that have been lost as a result of COVID have been jobs in the service sector. And we know that we still have a very sex segregated labor force, occupational sex segregation in the labor force. Women, yes, there are lots of women working. Yes, unemployment among women is falling, but we also have to look at the sectors in which women find employment. And so when we look at the sectors in which women find employment, we find that it's a lot of the service-related sectors, tourism, entertainment, and so on. So my concern, and I have literally zilch data, I don't have any data, but my concern is whether or not women have been absorbing violence because their legs have been cut from under them economically. I don't know, but it is definitely a concern to me. What has been happening? Why is it that we're not seeing this sort of uptick in report? I mean, and we're thankful for this, but I noted that we started off the year with a lot of murders of women by their partners, and then we hit COVID and it went away. It went away for maybe 3 months, and it's just where are we now, in July? It's just in June that I saw the reports again, and I wondered how are we going to understand what caused that hiatus and what was happening? And we know that very often a woman is murdered when she has decided to leave the relationship. And so that created a lot of concern for me as to what is happening in this space. Is it that women are now forced to tolerate abuse and to stay in relationships and to be quiet about it because they have lost their jobs? what do we know about that? So that is of concern to me. With respect to the National Strategic Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence, you know, I like to applaud effort, but I prefer results. And what I would say is that the strategic plan gives a very comprehensive framework. And I think what we have to do is to support any effort to implement this strategic plan. And I know that there is a lot of work that is going to be done in the Spotlight project, which would look at how the international donor partners can help to support the implementation of the strategic plan. So the strategic plan is a solid, comprehensive framework for us to work from. We really need now to give it legs, give it resources, and give it, when I say resources, I don't mean just money. We also have to give the capacity to implement this plan, because we have not always had the human resource capacity to implement these activities. So we really have to focus on actually doing what it is that we say we'd like to do. That's how I would answer that question.
Shawna, I don't know if you wanted to speak. I saw that you had turned on your mic.
I was listening to Carol saying that women, that women may not be reporting because they've lost their jobs and they're at home. And that is, you said you had no statistics for it, but truthfully, that could very well be the case. A lot of persons lost their jobs and they're now stuck at home with their perpetrators. Sometimes it could be both of them that lost their jobs, and the high level of frustration within that household will end up in women being physically and otherwise abused. Just wanted to say that.
And just to add to that, the idea of statistics and reporting. So what information that we got from DSP Samantha Smith, that's Deputy Superintendent, right, Shawna?
Sissoko, yes.
Right, from Sissoko in Kingston. So she confirmed that there's an 8% increase in reports in the parish of Clarendon, and that there's a general decrease in reports island-wide. So it confirms your suspicions, Carol, in terms of this sort of sudden decrease or this sudden silence on IPV, gender-based violence. Rosalie Gage Gray, and I think people would have perhaps heard her comments when she spoke to, I think it was TVJ some weeks ago, where she's the CEO of the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. She confirmed that the cases for children reported in the parish were in January 23, February 16, March 12, April 10, May 15, and June 26. And the DSP, she also said that she believes that there will be an increase in the cases come September when children go back to school. An additional statistic that I think we should think about as well is that at the Mapen Hospital, there's been a decrease in the age of sexual assault cases involving children who are showing up at the hospital. So during the month of May, there were 5 cases, and this is an increase from the 1 to 2 cases per year. And the children who are coming into the Mapen Hospital are all under the ages of 12. So that's a very troubling and extremely disturbing information coming out about abuse against children. And I was here thinking about the response that the government has given in general to COVID-19. We've seen where the government has responded to education, making concessions for children who are no longer going to school. We see responses to what's happening in the tourism industry. We've even seen responses to the potential increase in crime and violence. And incidentally, or well, coincidentally, or maybe that's not the correct word either, but we don't consider gender-based violence under the overall topic of crime and violence. And so we've seen where our government really has not paid much attention to gender-based violence during their COVID-19 response. And Carol, you would have already touched on your opinion on how the government has responded. So I wanted to ask Shawna, what are your thoughts on how the government has been responded to gender-based violence in COVID-19 specifically? Because there's been a large outcry from the global community about the potential for increase in gender-based violence, and even UN Women, they've been urging governments to be more robust in their response to gender-based violence, especially during this time.
Well, from what I see, what I can say is that the Bureau of Gender Affairs, they had some numbers that they were sharing in the newspaper for persons who are currently experiencing violence at home and asking them to make calls. Now, I tried calling, it did say it's 24-hour, right? So I tried calling last night and the phone rang without an answer. I got a voicemail to leave my name and number. I tried calling this morning and again, it rang without an answer, asking me to leave my name and number. So I'll just be waiting to see how long before somebody actually gives me a call back. And that is the response that the government put forward. I haven't seen any other responses. I know they also placed the number for the shelters, the crisis centers, for the one in Kingston and the one in Montego Bay. And for several months, I have been calling the shelter in Montego Bay, and I haven't been able to connect with anyone. But when you call the one in Kingston, you do get someone. But that is the response that the government has put forward. They've placed numbers in the newspapers, and they've shared it online. And I guess they would have shared it with some entities, asking them to ensure that persons are seeing these numbers and know that they can call. But when we call, we can't seem to connect with someone. But that's the general response. That was the response that was put forward, right? Women and children are at home. The children can't talk to their guidance counselors or to their teachers or to an adult that they trust about incidents of abuse. And women, they're locked off from their social circles. They don't have the support of persons who they work with or other family members. So they're at home. And how can they make these calls when they're stuck at home? We have to do more. We have to, I don't have the solutions, but I'm really hoping that somebody will have the solutions, right? Because I'm not sure if the minister has it at this point. But it would be very good for us to, as the government, for the government to try to ensure that they're going wider than just providing phone numbers. Ensure that you have persons within the community who can be points of contact for those persons who are experiencing violence. Ensure that they're persons they can trust, and ensure that if you're going to put out numbers for persons to call, make sure that there's somebody behind that sitting at a desk to answer that number. Ensure that persons are there on hand to provide support in the moment when the person calls, because more than likely they will call when it is safe for them to do so. When you call back, you're going to call back at a point where they may not be able to talk. So they'd miss that opportunity to talk to somebody who can provide support.
Very important points there, Shawna. I want to pull on both Carol and Paige, but first to Carol, you would have mentioned previously, I guess, a recommendation for responding to gender-based violence, which is a comprehensive act that would address violence against women and girls. And I wanted to ask you, drawing on your social policy and human rights background, what do you think are some survivor-centered ways in which we can approach justice in terms of gender-based violence? What are some practical steps in your expertise can we take to ensure some amount of justice or peace for survivors that really looks at them? I know you said it's complex, and we agree with you, it's a complex issue, right? But are there any ways that we can look to know, or any things that we can look to know to create for survivors? And I'm gonna allow Shawna and Paige to also respond, but I'm throwing it to you first, Carol.
I know that there is a lot of thinking around the whole area of restorative justice and how restorative justice approaches can be used to mediate conflict, gender-based conflict that lead to violence of women. I'm very cautious about those approaches because it has to be that the whole power dynamic in that relationship is taken into consideration when we start talking about mediation and other types of restorative justice approaches. So it can work, but we would have to ensure that the people who are responsible for this sort of intervention are people who are very well trained, who understand all the gender dynamics behind gender-based violence, whether it is in a heterosexual relationship or if it is in a same-sex relationship, that they understand what they allow the victim to fully the survivor to fully articulate their needs, what it is that they want to see. So restorative justice has a place, but it can't just be something we call restorative justice and leave it. It has to be handled through a highly trained cadre of people who understand gender relationships, who understand what is driving this sort of violence, and who therefore can respond to the needs of the survivor. So yes, it's interesting because when Shawna was talking about how the reporting goes, it occurred to me, why do women have to go to the police to report these things? Why is it that we don't have some other system that is as legitimate as reporting to the police? Why are we putting this? So it is a violation of the law. We recognize that, but law enforcement can come in many forms. The police does not have to be the only source of law enforcement, but we need to think about that as well. Is it that women really have to go to the police? I mean, I have had people call me to say, listen, I went with a friend to report her, abuse that she has suffered. And then when she leaves the police station, the policeman don't stop calls her nonstop because he wants to be with her and want her to go out with it. We can't leave these sorts of things in the hands of people who don't understand what they're dealing with, because it is a violation not only of the survivor's rights, but it's an abuse. It's a further abuse. So we have to look at those main issues about training. Who are we going to train, and how are we going to locate them so that women have access to them when they need them?
Paige or Shawna?
Yeah, I just had one thing I was thinking about from what Carol was sharing earlier when she was saying that I think many times when we speak about survivors, we speak about them being silenced and not speaking to people about their abuse. But Carol was sharing that I think it was 80% of them actually speak to people, but it's more family and friends versus actually reporting it. So I think when we're thinking about ways we can help solve the problem, we should think about those family and friends and people within the communities who they tend to go to, and think of ways we can provide them with information or ways that we can help them be a form of support for the women or the people who are experiencing this type of violence. I think we could talk about the actual community, their friends, their families, and how they can be a source of support for them. Shawna?
I can definitely agree with what you've said. How we have to start is to ensure that what we're doing, we're educating people and we're getting them to understand power and control, and just to be able to identify abuse in relationships, and not just the persons who are in the actual relationships, but this has to be a conversation with the country. People have to understand it, what it looks like, how it reveals itself, right? If once they know that this is happening, it would be easy for women, I'm hoping it would be easier for women to be able to share this with close friends or close family members, and then they would know what to do. That they'll fully understand that, hey, this is abuse, this is economic abuse, this is physical abuse, this is sexual abuse. and know what to do, because people don't know. People don't know because we don't have the conversation on a broad spectrum for people to understand and be able to fully identify what abuse is. A couple years ago, the Tambourine Army had a full action plan that they put together, and it was focused specifically on survivors and how to ensure that you are creating space for them, ensure that they are not blaming themselves and they're not ashamed for what happened to them, but that they're able to get to the place where they can help themselves and they can push forward, right? So having conversations with people in random spaces. If you enter a taxi cab with somebody, you're talking to them about these kind of things. But it has to be point persons who are well trained. And as Carol said, it has to be somebody who fully understands gender on a broad spectrum and able to talk to people about what gender-based violence looks like. So you're having conversations at bars, you're having conversations at the hairdressers, at different spaces where people gather, right? And you're teaching them, but you're teaching them in a more relaxed setting. So that could be a place where we start by having conversations with people. We had spoken earlier about, Carol also just mentioned that it shouldn't be that a woman have to go to the police station to sit and have a conversation with the police about it. We need to create a space where, not just one space, but what we call a one-stop shop for survivors. So they can go here and know that I start my conversation here, and these are compassionate persons who understand what has happened to me, and they can guide me. They can provide guidance in what to do and how to move forward if I choose to continue into the court process. We also have to ensure that there are online spaces that women can go to and that children can go to access information, right? Ensure that you put information in the buses, at the bus center, at the supermarkets, at the pharmacies, places where people are generally out and about and they can see, they can read through, they can find out who to call, what are some of the resources that I have that are available to me that I can use and that I can rely on as I go through this. So it can't just be a one man or the government or the Ministry of Gender or the Bureau of Gender Affairs. It has to be something that the country tackles, right? And we have to have persons on board. There are persons it would be nice for people to be offering their services. If you're a healing worker or a therapist or a counselor, offer your support. If you're in a parish and you know what is happening, offer your support to persons and let them know that these are persons I can reach out to. These are persons who understand what I'm going through, and these are persons who want to help. So it can't be one agency or one arm of the government who is doing it. It has to be something that we all take on.
I think Shawna makes an excellent point in terms of our response to gender-based violence has to be collective. It has to be something that each of us see ourselves as stakeholders in, something that each of us see as a part of our responsibility as citizens, a part of our responsibilities as our sister's keeper, as our brother's keeper. We have a few minutes left in our conversation, and I want to open this floor to any sort of questions. I know that both Judith and Taitu had questions. I'm gonna ask Judith, you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Kristina. First of all, congratulations for We Change for holding this today. I can't tell you how important it is. It really is. So, two things. I am mindful of, and I agree with Carol in her opinion on the use value of the restorative justice practice. I have had experiences with women in whose situation the court ruled that they should go to mediation, and it was disastrous. it did not work. And I get the sense from some people in that space now who are acknowledging that the restorative justice process has evolved in Jamaica is not the ideal place. So I would caution against us recommending it until we have more evidence about how damaging it actually could be. So I thank Carol for raising that point. I also like to support her point about a comprehensive legislative framework addressing all forms of violence against women. However, as Kristina mentioned, how deeply rooted the patriarchy is and the influence of our church throughout all of the institutions of the state, the police, the judiciary, the workers in the judicial system, and the legal fraternity itself. I getting old, right? And I soon gone, but I'm not holding my breath for those legislators to even begin that. We should put it on the table and advocate for it. But in the meantime, what do we do? I wanted to ask We Change, what has been your experience of working with gender sensitive, gender responsive counselors and attorneys who are willing to provide legal support stroke guidance, if not pro bono, maybe on reduced rates, as a beginning for creating the kind of safe spaces. I mean, we know that the system is stacked against women generally, and we therefore know how much worse it is for women from the LGBT community. We know of women from the LGBT community who cannot get the support they need from the system, and I use the word system generally. So my concern is, while we wait on the overall overhaul of the system, what can we do to provide the support that the system should be giving, but is not giving for women in this community? I'd welcome We Change's comments. Have you run into any lawyers like that? I've had a particular experience a couple of years ago with a funding agency who was very helpful in doing that. Maybe that's a quiet route to take in the meantime.
I can take it, Chris. Judith, a couple years ago, we had sent out a request to persons asking them to offer their services to survivors. It was done through Tambourine Army, and several persons offered services. There were several social workers who gave us their contact details. There were police officers, there were lawyers, there were other healing support workers. You had persons who practiced yoga, persons who practiced Reiki. There were persons who came on board. And we put together a resource database that is available on the Tambourine Army's page. And what we can do now is to update it.
Yes.
I know some of the numbers on it are not working now because I got a few new numbers earlier this year. But persons were actually sending their contact details, sending emails to say, yes, we want to be a part of this. We want to support women. We want to support children. And continuing, I guess what we can do as women's organization, there are several across Jamaica. There's We Change, there's E for Life, there's Women Inc., there's ROC, forgive me if I'm missing anybody, there's WMW, there are quite a few. So what we can do, and the Bureau of Gender Affairs, is to collate a list, put together a resource database for persons to access, because you know that the government alone can't do it. Right? And we have resources, we have persons we can reach out to. JFJ is definitely there, who is, every time We Change needs any legal advice, if there are persons who reach out to us, asking us questions, asking us to provide legal advice, we know we can definitely count on Jamaicans for Justice. We can just reach out to them and they will support that person. So we can continue to do the resource database, and ensure that we're working together to put it, to put this database together, not just in Kingston, but reach out to persons in the wider society.
Thanks, Shawna. Taitu had a question. Again, if you do have a question, you can indicate in the chat or you can use the raise hand feature.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much for this wonderful conversation. So many points of interest and intersection. I don't even know where to start. I'm going to try and keep it simple. Carol, good to see you. Good to see you. I had a question for you, but before I ask Carol the question, I wanted to piggyback on what Shawna had just raised with regards to Jamaicans for Justice. They have just started a specific project on supporting victims of gender-based violence to go through the process of cases. And that is something that I think it was launched just last week, if I remember correctly.
Recently.
Very recently, it's not even 2 weeks old.
Yeah, I don't think
that
so.
is a service that they have launched recently to be able to.
They had been doing it before the launch.
I realize that, yeah, but I think in terms of the readiness of the product, yeah, it wasn't. What can I say? It wasn't strategic. They would help a victim or a survivor as much as they would help another victim or survivor that they weren't necessarily a victim of rape or incest. It could be a victim of something else, police brutality or whatever. Yeah. So it's now more targeted to victims for that specific project. So I just wanted to put that out there. Carol, I remember when the project with UN Women was ongoing, we were, one of the earlier concerns was the urban-centric sampling and the effort that was made to ensure that we got women interviewed who came from rural areas in Jamaica. Not remembering all the data or the discussions, but I was wondering if you could just give us some idea, if you remember, if you have the reports in front of you, on the kind of rural and urban disparities that you saw, because as some of us would know, the access to services is even more difficult in rural communities than in urban spaces, and it is already I would want to call it almost a natural disaster, but I'll leave it there for now.
Man-made. This is
if you're right, sorry, it's a man-made disaster. M-A-N, capital M-A-N.
All right, so in terms of the rural urban, we did see some differences, although we didn't see differences in the prevalence of violence. But what we saw were differences in the attitudes to gender roles. So, and there were some of the differences, if I recall, were unexpected. So for example, rural women living in rural areas, if we want maybe a better way to say it, felt that the whole matter of intimate partner violence was an issue between, they were more likely to feel that it was an issue between the man and the woman, since we looked at heterosexual relationships, than women living in urban areas. So you found some subtle differences in terms of perceptions of gender-based violence and perceptions of gender roles. But those differences did not translate into any significant difference in women's experiences. So women in urban areas were just as likely to experience violence as women in rural areas. So, but yes, there were differences in terms of access to services, because women in urban areas had more places to go to access services. So definitely that led us to conclude that women in rural areas were more underserved. Let's not fool ourselves. All women are underserved, but women in rural areas were more underserved, because even in urban areas, women do not have enough, or they do not, let me put it another way, they do not know of enough places to go. So whether those places exist or not is a different thing from whether women know where they can go to get help when they need.
Thank you for that, Carol. I think that's definitely something that comes up a lot when we're having conversations about how to provide services. We do notice that in urban spaces, or well, it seems there's a huge focus in urban spaces, and we kind of leave our rural women to fend for themselves, or not give them as much support as they truly need. Thank you for that question, Tai 2.
Can I say one more thing,
Hillary, sure,
please,
sure,
Kristina?
Carol.
Okay, so Title didn't ask this, but another thing that happened in the surveys was that we wanted, one of the donors had a particular interest in looking at whether in the community, it's a CSJP project, whether in those communities that were more, that were tagged as high violence communities, you had any greater prevalence of intimate partner violence, and there was no difference. So this idea that that women in some communities may suffer more, the data did not bear that out. It was women right across the spectrum.
Thank you for that interjection, Carol. Hillary, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Kristina.
No problem.
And I want to congratulate We Change also. You deserve as many times as we can hear the congratulations. And thank you. I feel a little frustrated because some of the issues that come up as challenging issues we've been facing for decades, since we've all been working in the area of GBV. And one of the questions that I have, a question that has faced WMW when we were more active, again, over several decades of work, how to involve the churches more in providing support for women and being willing to face the issue in a less patriarchal way. I'm going to be optimistic that without knowing, I'm assuming that there are many churches out there who are not just sending women home to be good wives and obedient. There may be some, but I think that there are many that are willing to support. I don't think that we've ever been able to make strategic links with the churches. And since the issue of the isolation of women in rural spaces who don't have access to services has just been mentioned, the one place they're likely to go to for support of any kind is the church, talking to church sisters or a pastor. And unless we can make strategic alliances with church organizations, with women's groups within church organizations who are willing to take this on board, willing to support training around gender relations and GBV, we're not going to, I don't think, make much headway in Jamaica. I don't know what the solution is, and I would love to hear from the new generation of feminists who you all are, and I give thanks for you all. How do you think we can do a better job of this? That's my main question. My second very short question, does anybody have any experience or knowledge about how well or not the domestic violence units at the 2 police stations, one in Ligony, one in Matilda's Corner or Constant Spring, how well they serve clients who go to them? Thank you.
I'm going to say, Hillary, the example I gave about the report that was made at about abuse, and then the young woman was pursued by the police officer. That report was made at the one in Constant Spring.
Oh,
and maybe that helps to answer your question.
Oh, okay. Oh, goodness. Okay.
In terms of the churches, I don't know how those relationships would be broken, but I believe they need to be broken. One of the things that I found coming out of this survey is that I got several invitations from church groups to speak to them about the data. So I took that as a very positive indication that they were beginning to think about the issue. They wanted to know a little bit more. And so maybe there were, I'm just really speaking in some real generalizations here, because I don't know what if they ever followed through on anything. But I agree with you that it's a critical constituent, because for the point you raised about women in the rural areas, but also because they have a lot of influence over belief systems and community response and the ability to reach women. But if women don't see them as spaces to go, and in the data we saw that women don't think of the church as a place to go when they need assistance with domestic violence. So there's a lot of work to be done there before they can offer themselves as possible entry points for support.
I wanted to share probably 2 instances that I've had with engaging the church. I know it's very difficult to, and Carol, I don't know how they got to inviting you to talk, but that is progress. I've never seen it, right? But it's good that they wanted you to share the data and possibly for them to think through what they can do as a unit. It would be good if this is something that they keep on their agenda, right? Because a lot of women are in the church and women from different social groups, and they would have been sharing challenges with either a church sister or a pastor that they're close to, and they've oftentimes more than not gotten support with reporting. I know I have a friend who reported a couple of years ago to her church that she was raped by somebody in the church, and their thing was to tell her that this has to stay in the church between God's people. Let the church deal with it. Let God deal with it. And it never left the church, right? She ended up being the person who was told to, you can't be doing these things. She was removed from choir. She was removed from any leadership position because clearly she did something wrong. So this is where the church is at. They are going to want to say, let us work it out here. And I'm sure there will be instances where the persons would want to do otherwise, but because of the counseling and support that they would have been getting, they most times they don't report. So there could very well be, and the reality that the cases that we're seeing could be more than what the figures are actually saying, because some persons are advised to not take it any further. And I remember a couple of years ago when we went to a church in Maidstone in Manchester, trying to support a young girl who was raped by a pastor, and the church members, specifically the women, they told us to get out. They told us to get out because, again, it is the church's business. So I don't know how we're going to get to church leaders and elders and whoever it is that is in these spaces, but we need to. Something has to happen because a lot of women are reporting to these churches, and it would be very good if they are given the kinds of support that they need to get through.
Thank you so much, Shawna and Carol, for responding to that. We definitely acknowledge that the church in Jamaica has huge influence within our spaces, and some amount of partnership has to be struck in order to help to tackle this issue of gender-based violence. I know that Taitu's hand was up again. I don't know if you still wanted to ask or say something, Taitu.
Yes, but I was going to defer to anybody else who hadn't spoken before.
Okay, I know that Honor 8S, I think that somebody's phone had a hand up. Hello? Hello? No? All right. Title, you can go ahead.
It was Honor your back. Want to go ahead?
Oh, this is
Go ahead,
nice.
Honor.
Yeah, I think they're back. Hi. Hello?
And Narcisse as well.
Carol?
Hi. Yeah, hi.
Hi, Carol. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody.
I'm sorry, Carol. I think you're, something is happening with your internet connection. We're not able to hear you clearly.
Are you hearing
Do
me
you
any
mind
better?
typing your question in the chat? Yeah, this is much better.
Okay, so I was saying that we've had a long we and they for them not being sustained. So I don't know if Pat Phillips is on this Zoom, but Pat has supported the Jamaica Council of Churches in a GBV program.
Carol, your mic is doing something again. I'm gonna suggest that you type your question in the chat.
And so it would be done for us to find out what.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask. Yes, Carol, we're not able to hear you properly, so I'm just gonna ask that you type your question or your comment in the chat, and I'll read it out. While we wait for that, Taitu, you can go ahead.
Okay, it was a comment more than a question, because I mean, I heard Hillary's frustration in the sense that the issues are the same, you know, and I agree with her. And I'm one generation behind Hillary, and so it's frustrating to be at this point, you know, of where we've had decades of advocacy, and the traction is not as good as we would like it in terms of helping women survive gender-based violence and to go beyond survival, you know, to thrive as well and to get back into their own power. And so it's something that I've been giving a lot of thought to, as it's preventative, because I think we have to look at the environment in which that we're living in, not just in Jamaica, but in the wider Caribbean and even globally, the environment in which that we're living in that allows gender-based violence to happen is almost a very anti-woman environment. It's extremely hostile to the lives of women. And the church, in a way, church, that capital C, has contributed to that level of hostility. So my rethinking of the whole thing is preventative, insofar as I think we have to start thinking about raising or coming up with programs and strategies that re-socialize girls to be in charge of themselves. Not that is going to necessarily prevent violence, but it could actually, but there are certain aspects of our environment, particularly in how we socialize girls to just be nice. You know, the nice girl trope is very problematic, because very early we silence their ability to have their own voice, to own their own voice, to say no. You know, re-socializing parents, and Adra is on the call. I know she's one of those parents who you know, believes in revolutionary mothering, where you have to arm girls with a certain kind of values and beliefs about themselves and about their bodies to be able to respond to any kind of verbal or, you know, sexual harassment and so on. But just basically train them from very early how to stand in their own power. Whereas when we reflect back on our own socialization, we weren't socialized to stand in our own power in the same way that I would say, for instance, that Adra is doing with her daughter. And a couple other friends as well. So my thinking is that we have to really come up with strategies and projects that target girls from they're very young, like from 12 up to 18, which is one of the programs that I'm doing here in one capacity, where we are socializing girls to rethink about themselves, so that from very early things about owning your own voice, what is consent, what is sexual grooming, letting them really recognize that, you know, there's an environment out there that is not welcoming, that is hostile, and that not all men are nice. You know, and it's, you know, everybody that approaches you, and that the worth that you have is not, the worth that is bestowed upon you has nothing to do with the male gaze, that you have to find worth within yourself and be present in the body that you have. And all of that has nothing to do with seeking value or seeking validation from men, you know. So I think that to me is also part of a strategy that we can think through in terms of coming up with projects that address that. The second one is, I really think we need to think about dismantling the notion between what is a predator and what is a protector in a very traditional role, right? Because we are socialized to think that men are supposed to be a protector. Some of us may have grown up in an environment where, you know, our siblings or fathers or uncles and so on may have been played a protective role. But sometimes that male protective role is not always there, so you may end up, you know, you may have the unfortunate incidents of being harassed or raped by a family member or a relative or whatever, or a stranger, right? So nobody warns girls about predators really until and then the blame gets heaped on. So I think very early in preparing girls for the fact that this is the real world that we live in, you know, we have to start thinking about getting girls to learn self-defense from early, anchor them in self-defense, that they have to know how to respond to bullying, that they have to have the voice to respond to verbal abuse. And so those are the things I think we have to think through in terms of addressing it from a different programmatic approach. One that I'm doing right now with one. So there's, you know, because the programs that we have done decades that everybody has addressed here work in some ways, but we've seen the same things, as Hillary has said, decade after decade after decade, where the state support is not adequate and where the NGOs don't have enough resources to take it on all, because it quite frankly, it seems as if it has gotten worse rather than lessened over the years. So I will leave it there for now. Maybe Shawna can talk about, or well, maybe I could say it here. Can I continue? Yeah, okay, thanks. One of the other things that I learned with working with We Change and Tamarind Army in the healing circles is that the trauma stays in the body, and that the programmatic framework and the framework that we have for counseling does not address the fact that trauma is in the body. So you may get to a state, the survivor will get to a state of functioning and she may be able to get on with her life, but the lived trauma, or whether it was rape or whether it was incest or whether it was sexual harassment, remains in the body. So therefore we have to take on healing strategies or different approaches that deal with getting the trauma out of the body, so that the girls and the women can reclaim themselves back in and be present again in their bodies. And this can only be done by things like getting into dance as therapy, getting into yoga as therapy, getting into drums as therapy, relearning the ways of our indigenous ancestors, relearning the ways of our African and Indian ancestors of how to utilize these things that are already in our heritage, so to speak, that deal with addressing stress and trauma that lives in the body of survivors. So that to me is an additional strategy. I know it's something that We Change does because it's part of our framework, but it's not something that we will see in the broader spaces in Jamaica, because once you come with that kind of thing, it's alternative, it's hocus pocus, you know, it doesn't fit in the Christian frame that is often the counseling frame that we are given to work with. So we have to then find other healing practitioners that do stuff that helps to move trauma from out of the body. And once that happens, then, you know, the gate of liberation is wide open. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Title. You made some extremely critical points, and as she would have mentioned, some of these alternative ways of healing and processing the traumatic experiences that you would have had is definitely a part of We Change's mandate, and it would be excellent if we could replicate that in varying communities across Jamaica. We far spent our time, and in case anyone else, no one else has any questions. All right, great. I want to thank
Can I
our
just say
panel.
one thing?
Sure, Carol.
Just want to, I'm really sorry that we didn't get the comment about the work that had happened with JC's, the Council of Churches, because I think it's really an important entry point for us. I mean, not to belabor it, but when I think of the churches, you know, the churches have this dual role almost, you know, in women's lives, a role of both oppression and some women have used the churches as a space also for what they would consider redemption. And so I don't think that the churches can be set apart and ignored in this as we look at how we can create more opportunities for survivor-centered approaches to providing services for women who have experienced violence.
Thanks, Carol. Carol Narcisse, I see where you said you've posted your points, but I'm unfortunately not seeing it in the chat. So while I wait to see if those points come up, I want to read some of the comments that have been happening in the chat here. So Joan Joy Grant Cummings has said, unfortunately, we're still top among the Caribbean countries with the earliest age of sexual assault or rape of girls, and that being 6 years and even less. Our governments over the years, regardless of administration, have ignored this fact. She also said, having worked with Canadian Indigenous women who explained this method, I don't agree with its use in JA because in addition to what you said, Carol, I'm assuming this is about the restorative justice. It is a part of the cultural education of girls from pre-puberty, a certain way of being and understanding within their cultural context. And this would go back to what Taitu mentioned in terms of training and teaching girls from very young about issues of consent as well as ownership over their bodies. Taitu had said, also in tandem with finding better survivor-centered approach to IPV and broader GBV, we have to consider preventative approaches. And again, she would have mentioned that just now. Let's see. Hillary said, yes, Carol, churches are hugely influential read gender relations, family relationships, and that's why I feel that strategic alliances somehow are needed. Hundreds of thousands of women in JA are involved with the church. We know about the horror stories. How can we move forward on this? How can we find at least some allies in the church and work more through and with them? A recent president of JCCC, which was mentioned, Reverend Hyde Riley, is a gender specialist. We didn't strategically build alliances with her. Not all church leaders are backwards. And Taitu affirmed and said, start with churches that are led by women. Lorna says, churches are owners of large tracts of land. We have to encourage them to build shelters and other types of safe places that can shelter women and their children. Still not seeing Carol Narcisse's text. I was really hoping that we could get that. Not seeing it.
Can I try audio?
Yeah, let's see if we can get you through audio. Go ahead.
Let me be quick. So I was saying that Pat Phillips worked up till last year with the Jamaica Council of Churches, which had a GBV program. And so I think it would be important to find out what that program entailed. My understanding is that it included training of Kwan too. I've been asked over in the churches to do workshops. So the women's auxiliaries might be are an entry point. And we were on a Zoom with the Minister of Funds have been approved for. So we really need to be affairs, what is taken up. And lastly, an election is coming up. We have in the past, there are women on this call who will remember in the elections past, we've done a women's manifesto. It may well be time for this next, is what were the priorities and what might have changed, and to actually put some energy behind even 2 or 3 things that we want to push both parties as they're coming to look everybody's vote in going into the election.
I think we did hear, right? We kind of caught most of what Carol had said. Does anyone want to respond? Carol or Shawna?
I think it'd be great to hear what that program that was done with the Jamaica Council of Churches included. And I agree that we can't, I'll just say it again, the strategic partnerships with the church, very important to push this cause forward. And I do recognize that it might be easier to form strategic partnerships with the church around violence against women in heterosexual relationships than it may be to get them to the place where they would be able to be service providers for violence against women in same-sex relationships. So it's not comprehensive, and it doesn't cover everybody. That will be sure.
Okay, I'm going to cap that as our last response to this. I want to thank firstly our panelists for taking time to come and be with us and share with us from their expertise and their knowledge. Thank you so much, Carol Watson Williams, for being a part of this conversation with us. Thank you to Paige Andrew for sharing her research with us, and thank you, Shawna, for sharing your expertise and your knowledge. And thank you to everyone for joining in this conversation. It's definitely the kind of conversation that needs to go on and on and on, even if it's exhausting, as Carol might say that sometimes she gets tired to talk about the same thing over and over again. And Hillary and Taito have expressed the longevity with which we have been grappling with this, but we also understand the need and the necessity for it. So again, thank you so much to everybody for joining us. This is the end of our COVID-19 conversations. And I hope you have a great rest of the day.
And just a reminder to check out the videos, the video recordings on our YouTube channel. That's We Change JA.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
All right. Bye-bye.